Thank you for downloading the Hong Kong Writers Circle podcast. For more information, please visit our website hkwriterscircle.com. Welcome to the Hong Kong Writers Circle special podcast series in collaboration with the British Council. In this episode, I speak to Sophie Hannah, who will be appearing at the 2017 Hong Kong Book Fair from the 24th to the 26th of July at the Hong Kong Exhibition and Convention Centre. Event details and registration information are available at britishcouncil.hk. I'm joined by Sophie Hannah for this special episode of the Hong Kong Writers Circle podcast in collaboration with the British Council. Sophie is a poet and novelist and is in Hong Kong this summer with the Hong Kong Book Fair. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you.
So your latest novel is your second for Hercule Poirot and is entitled Closed Casket. How does it feel taking over such an iconic character?
Well, I've been a huge fan of Agatha Christie's books since I was 12. And I collected all of them and read all of them and was a passionate Agatha fan. But I would never in a million years have thought that I would be the person who was asked to continue Hercule Poirot. So, it's a huge honour, something I never expected to be doing. But it's been just a wonderful experience, really. Not only writing the books and working with the Christie family, who've been lovely and supportive and encouraging, but also having the chance to travel around the world and be a sort of Agatha Christie missionary, because wherever I go, I talk about my Poirot novels, but I also talk about why I love Agatha Christie and what's so great about her and why everyone should read her. And so that's been really fantastic, sort of reminding the world of how brilliant Agatha Christie is.
I wondered, how did this opportunity arise for you? Because I'm aware that you were already a crime fiction writer before this opportunity came up. But, did somebody contact you, or was it like an advert in the classifieds? How does one become the new Agatha Christie?
Well, first of all, I should stress that I'm absolutely not trying to be the new Agatha Christie. There can only ever be one Agatha Christie. All I'm doing is writing Poirot continuation novels. It sounds like it's splitting hairs, but it's actually quite interesting to hear how people define it. I've done events where people have come up to me and said, "So, are you Agatha Christie now?" And I have to go, "No, nobody's Agatha Christie now. I'm just someone who's writing about one of her characters." How it came about, it was all a complete and very weird coincidence of timing. So my literary agent was at a meeting with HarperCollins, who are Agatha Christie's publishers, and his meeting wasn't about anything to do with Agatha Christie or anything to do with me. But while he was in this meeting at HarperCollins, he remembered that HarperCollins publish Agatha Christie's books, and he also remembered that I was a big Agatha Christie fan. So he said to the editor that he was meeting with, "I've got a client, Sophie Hannah, who's a massive Agatha Christie fan. Why don't you ask her to write a continuation novel?" The editor said, "Well, we'd love to do something like that, but we don't think the family would be very keen on that." And then the very next day, that same editor, by sheer coincidence, had a meeting with the Christie family, at which the Christie family said, "You know what? We've started to think now might be the time to think about doing a continuation novel."
Wow.
At which point the editor said, "This is strange. I had an agent in my office yesterday who reckons he's got the perfect author." And, it really was a coincidence, and just, my agent was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. And you say that you've been working with the estate. It must be amazing. I guess you must have been able to have access to some of her notes and files and...
Well, actually, my reading of her, my knowledge of her notes and her sort of archive material, I got almost exclusively from two very brilliant books called Agatha Christie's Secret Notebooks and Murder in the Making, both of which are by John Curran, who is one of the world's leading Agatha Christie experts. So that's where I got the sort of archive information from. My main sort of homework that I did, though, was rereading for probably the fourth time in my life all of Agatha's books again, but from a more analytical perspective, because I'd always just read them before as a reader and as a fan. I'd never before read them thinking, I need to notice what's going on here because I have to write a Poirot novel now.
I mean, as you say, it's a continuation of that particular body of work that Agatha Christie did, and I'm reading Closed Casket actually at the moment, and I feel that. I feel like you are continuing it and putting your own spin on the existing body of work. I wonder if you could comment on the ways that you're doing that.
Well, exactly. So, I mean, the challenge that any continuation novelist faces is you want to write something that successfully continues whatever the original series or the original character did and was and represented, but you don't want to copy. So, I mean, I was always very clear that I did not want to copy Agatha Christie's, for example, writing style. I didn't want to try and mimic her prose. I didn't want to try and create the impression that it was her still writing, because I just don't think one writer can or should copy the style of another. So what I wanted to do was write as good novels as possible, starring Poirot as the detective, with challenging mysteries, just like Agatha's Poirot novels, you know, challenging mysteries that only Poirot would be clever enough to solve, and that readers of Agatha's Poirot novels would hopefully really enjoy, while at the same time recognising that they may be slightly different from Agatha's because a different writer's writing them. And the way I decided to get round that issue or approach it was by creating a new narrator. So for my two Poirot novels, because before Closed Casket there was the Monogram Murders, Closed Casket is the second, Monogram Murders is the first. For both my Poirot novels, they are narrated by a character that I invented called Edward Catchpool. And obviously, because I invented him, he's not in any of Agatha's Poirot novels. And he's the narrator of the Monogram Murders and Closed Casket. So I thought that was quite a sensible way to approach it. So it's a Poirot novel, but the story is being told by a new voice that readers won't have encountered before, and that's Edward Catchpool. And I thought that was a good way of handling the sort of the same but different issue.
What's really nice about that, in right at the beginning of Closed Casket, is that Edward Catchpool speaks like directly to the reader and says, you know, I'm the person narrating this story.
Yes, yeah, and he does. That's also a little nod to the Monogram Murders, because in both the Monogram Murders and Closed Casket, the first chapter appears to be written in the third person, so that the reader is just witnessing a scene. And Catchpool only comes in as narrator and introduces himself in the beginning of chapter 2, at which point he says, I'm the narrator. You probably didn't know there was a narrator, but it was me who's just written that, you know. So
yeah.
Agatha was very keen on sort of writing about writing and creating fiction. There was a very sort of strong meta postmodern strand to her work, and so that device of having Catchpool being the narrator but only appearing in the second chapter is kind of my acknowledgement of her slightly more playful literary devices that she sometimes used.
Sure. So you have a very diverse body of work, from poetry to translation to children's literature. I wonder, what are some of the challenges of writing in so many different forms?
Well, obviously, every form has its own challenges, and, you know, I mean, even if you only wrote in the same form over and over again, each new work that you're writing is a challenge. I actually feel that writing in lots of different genres and lots of, you know, having different kind of, I don't know, writing heads that I can put on, I find that keeps me quite creatively refreshed. You know, instead of thinking I'm just going to write this way because that's how I write, I approach each new project thinking, well, I will do a variety of things, and which thing am I doing now? And it just makes me think more carefully about the sort of choices I'm making whenever I'm writing anything.
Yeah. It's related to this podcast and to your visit to Hong Kong. there's sort of two strands to that. One is the crime fiction, one is the poetry. I wonder if either one of them is your true love, or whether you love them equally.
I mean, it depends how many true loves I'm allowed to have. I mean, I think crime fiction, I mean, I love poetry, and I still write poetry. And, for about 10 years before I started writing crime, I wrote pretty much nothing but poetry. And at the time, that was my one true love. But since I've started writing crime and been doing, at least a book a year, sometimes more, that's become my main sort of creative project. It's where my main creative energy is. And so that has taken over as the love of my life, as it were.
I think I'm only going to allow you to
the love of my literary life, anyway.
So, as part of this podcast, and what the Hong Kong Writers Circle does is discuss the craft of writing. I wonder what your writing process is like, especially for writing for writing crime fiction or whodunits. What is your process like?
Well, I usually start. In fact, I always start with a kind of concept that I love, and that concept is always either a really intriguing, mysterious hook for the beginning, or an ingenious solution or twist at the end. So I always either start with a brilliant beginning or a brilliant ending when I say brilliant, not objectively brilliant, but that I think is brilliant, and that I know I can be enthusiastic about writing. Once I've got that, then I just sort of allow other ideas to accumulate around it for a while. And once enough ideas have accumulated around it, then I will do a plan. I'm a very, very big believer in planning. And I know a lot of writers say they'd hate to plan their novels before they started writing them because it would sort of take the spontaneity out of it. But for me, I find that dividing the writing process into two clear stages, one is the planning stage, and that to me, I mean, if you call it something more exciting than planning, it sounds more creative. So you can call it sort of the story architecture, and that is the stage where I go through the novel I write it scene by scene, but in note form. So I'm not trying to write well or beautifully or brilliantly. I'm just literally going through the book in the order that the scenes appear, and writing what each scene will contain in note form. And then I tinker about with that, and I check that everything's in the right place and the pace is right, and are there enough clues, and should there be a twist, kind of thing. Then once I'm happy that the plan is as good as it could be, then I start writing the actual book, and that's the stage where I bring everything to life and write as well as I can and make it all work. But I find it really helps to divide the writing process into those two stages, because it means that when I'm writing the actual book, I can really concentrate on writing each scene as well as I can without simultaneously having to worry about, is the plot working? Do I need another murder here? And that sort of thing.
And certainly, I mean, for the Poirot novels, I mean, these are effectively period pieces, I mean, they're taking place in the 1920s. In effectively a country that sort of doesn't exist anymore, right? The Free Irish Republic.
Yeah.
So there must have been quite a considerable research element to that as well.
Yes, I did a lot of research into the Irish political situation at that time. And actually, the reason I chose to set the book in Ireland at that time wasn't anything to do with the fascinating political situation. It was because the book, so both of my Poirot novels are set in 1929, because we decided early on, the Christie family and I decided that it was sensible to set the books in the 4 years when Agatha didn't write any Poirot novels. So between 1928 and 1932, there were no Poirot novels published. And so Poirot is, as it were, unaccounted for during that period. So that was when they were set. And then I chose Ireland because I knew I wanted to have a kind of big house, isolated community, everyone under this roof is a suspect kind of setup. And I looked on the internet for suitably big houses with enough bedrooms for all my murder suspects, detectives, victims, everybody. And the first one I found that was a promising contender happened to be in Ireland. So, that was why I chose Ireland. And then when I told people it was going to be set in Ireland, so many people said, oh, well, of course, the politics then in Ireland. I was like, right, I clearly need to do some research. So I did.
I just wanted to go back to one point that you made, which is that, because I would have thought that a whodunit would always be written from the back to the front, sort of backwards, as it were, from the conclusion or the big reveal at the end. But you said that sometimes it would, for you might even start at the beginning.
Start at the beginning. So, yeah, so actually Closed Casket did start with an idea for an ending. And it's probably one of the reasons Closed Casket is my favourite of all the books I've published so far, by far, because the first idea I had for it, that initial concept that made me want to write it, was an idea for a motive for murder. And it was a motive that I thought I couldn't believe. I sort of felt as though fate had dropped the most perfect idea into my head, because this idea, this motive for murder, was so simple. It can be summarised in 4 words. I could say 4, I won't because you're reading it and I don't want to spoil it for you, but I could say 4 words now and you would be able to go, oh, wow, that's really clever. And it's a concept that you could attach to any number of stories. It doesn't have to be attached to a country house mystery. It's a kind of almost archetypal kind of concept. It's incredibly simple. It's so simple it's almost obvious. And yet I knew that nobody would guess it, ever. And I just thought, this is the holy grail of ideas. And so then I worked backwards to the beginning, and I thought, well, obviously I need to create an intriguing mystery at the beginning, because you can't say to people, read this book because the ending's brilliant. You've got to hook them at the beginning. And so I worked backwards to an intriguing beginning. But with others of my crime novels, it's been the opposite way. So, I'm just about to start writing Poirot novel number 3, which is coming out next September. And that's first started with an idea for a beginning, an opening hook. And when I have those ideas, then I work forwards. When I have ideas for endings, I work backwards.
Yeah, absolutely no spoilers at all on the Hong Kong Writers Circle podcast, I promise. So you're visiting Hong Kong as part of the Hong Kong Book Fair, and let me just very quickly run through the events that you will be attending or be part of. So on Monday the 24th, you're going to be at the Hong Kong Exhibition and Convention Centre in conversation with Linda Kennedy and going into a little bit more detail about Poirot. On Tuesday the 25th, you will be in conversation with me again at the British Council. We're going to focus a bit more on poetry and have some readings as well then.
Yeah.
And then on the Wednesday, you will be at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University to you're going to be discussing contemporary crime fiction. So it's quite a busy schedule for you and for the other people that we've brought over. I just wondered whether this will be your first time in Hong Kong or whether you planned a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, this will be my first time in Hong Kong, and even though it's a relatively short trip, I'm very much looking forward to it.
Excellent. Fantastic.
I know lots of people from England who went to Hong Kong supposedly for a little bit and ended up staying because they loved it so much. So I'm expecting it to be great. Excellent.
What would be your... I always ask my guests for their top 5 writing tips for members of the Hong Kong Writers Circle. I wonder if you could come up with 5 tips for us.
5 tips. Okay. Tip number 1, the most important thing is having a great idea for a story. If you can have an idea for a story that when you tell people the idea, they go, oh, now I really want to read that. And not all books have that. There are some very good books which, they're not based on an easily communicable idea. But if you have an idea for a story that's really unusual and original, then just telling people what your story's about will make them want to read it so much more. If someone says to you, what's your novel about? And you say, well, there's this woman, and at first she's a bit unhappy, and then maybe she meets... that could be a great novel, but it's not going to make anyone go, ooh.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think of, say, one of my favourite thrillers, Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson, someone says to you, what's that book about? You say it's about a woman who loses all her memories every time she sleeps and wakes up every morning remembering nothing about herself and her life. The minute you hear that, you go, oh, I must read that. So that would be tip number 1. Tip number 2 would be plan. And don't think of planning as boring, and don't think that it means that then when you write the book, there's nothing creative and spontaneous about it. You can always divert off course, add new things. The creative process goes on and on until the book is finished, but just having that planning stage before you start writing the book, I find is immensely helpful, and an important creative stage where you get to actually construct the story on a structural level before you have to bring that story to life. And it saves, if you can do some editing at the planning stage, it saves you potentially years of rewriting. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, join a writer's group or go on a writing course where something about the setup enables you to get feedback from lots of different people, because that's how you hone your inner editorial voice. When you start writing, you have no idea whether what you've written is any good or not. You might think it's wildly brilliant, you might think it's absolutely terrible. The chances are you won't really know how to assess it because you haven't had a chance to develop your inner editor. If you go to a writing group where there are, say, 5 or 6 people, or you do a writing course where there's 10 or 11 people, and they all give you regular feedback, you find yourself thinking, yeah, Fred's suggestion was actually brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? On the other hand, Maureen's suggestion was absolutely bonkers. She must have read a different, what's she playing at? And by realising who you agree with and disagree with about your own work, that is how your inner editorial voice kind of comes out. And then hopefully you get to the point where once you've been writing for a while and you've been developing your inner editor, then you know straight away whether what you've written needs more work or whether it's okay. So definitely I would say feedback from other people, sensible and silly, is helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to take that as a full endorsement of the Hong Kong Writers Circle by Sophie Hannah.
Exactly.
What's your tip?
So how many more have
you got 2 more.
2 more. Okay, yes. So I would say don't mistake plausibility for commonplace. People sometimes say, oh, well, I'm not sure that's plausible. And what they mean is it doesn't happen every day in the village where I live. The best stories often are about the things that would only ever happen once in a particular and peculiar set of circumstances. And that's what makes the story so exciting. This probably isn't something you've heard about happening all over your local town, but it could happen, and if it did, it would be very kind of outlandish and attention-grabbing and amazing and exciting, and that's the kind of story you want to tell. You don't want to tell the kind of story where everyone behaves exactly in the way that all the people behave.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real danger that people think, oh, that might not be believable. Anything that's scientifically possible is believable because people are much weirder than we often assume. Most people are much weirder than... and very few writers get that. Agatha Christie understood that. Ruth Rendell understood that. But lots of fiction writers, in order to be sort of commercially appealing, they tidy people up and make them more consistent, more rational, more... motivated by virtuous things than human beings really are.
How about number 5?
Tip number 5. Tip number 5. When you finish whatever you're writing, whether it's a short story, a novel, or whatever, when you get to the end, think to yourself, is there anything else I can add that can just make this more unusual, more exciting? Is there one little thing that if I just added one small element, that it could make the book or story rise to a new level? And very often, if you think like that, you will find there is that one little thing you can add, and it makes all the difference.
It's the Worcestershire sauce in the bolognese mix, I think.
Exactly. Exactly.
You mentioned that you're going to start work on the third of your Poirot continuation novels. I wonder if there are any other projects in the works that you would like to give us a little preview of?
Yes, so in August, end of August this year, my next book is coming out, and it's not a Poirot novel. It's a standalone psychological thriller called Did You See Melody?
Okay.
And it's my first ever book that's had a question mark in its title. So it's Did You See Melody? ? And it's about an English woman who effectively runs away from home, taking a good chunk of the family savings with her without telling her family or anything. And she runs away to a 5-star spa resort in Arizona. And when she gets to the hotel at this posh resort, she is sent to a room that is already occupied. So the receptionist gives her a key. She goes into the room. It's already occupied. So it's all terribly embarrassing because she's walked into these strangers' room in the middle of the night. The next day, she discovers that the teenage girl she met in that wrong hotel room is in fact America's most famous murder victim. And her parents, she's called Melody, obviously, her parents are currently serving a life sentence for her murder. And only the heroine of the novel, this British tourist, knows that that famous murder victim is in fact alive and at the resort. So that's the premise, and the title is Did You See Melody?
Well, when I finish Closed Casket, I think I'm going to have to start on that one.
I'll bring you a copy when I come to Hong Kong.
That'll be lovely. So, yes, we haven't met each other properly yet, only we're recording this on Skype, but when I get back from my holes, I will be in conversation with you properly, and we'll get to meet and say hi at the British Council. So, but this podcast will be released before that, so if you're listening before the 25th of July, then do come down to see both Sophie and I for some more literary chat, courtesy of the British Council. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time, for speaking to me this evening, and look forward to seeing you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
The Hong Kong Writers' Circle podcast, episode 30, Sophie Hannah times British Council, was produced by me, Simon Overton. For more information about this show and all of our other activities, please visit our website, hkwriterscircle.com. Closed Casket is by Sophie Hannah and published by HarperCollins. The interview with Sophie Hannah and her appearance at the Hong Kong Book Fair 2017 was organised by the British Council. The podcast theme music was Jingle Jazz by Quantum Jazz from the album End of Line, used under the terms of a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 3.0 licence. If you are an author, publisher or musician and would like to collaborate on an episode of this podcast, or for any other feedback, please email hello@hkwriterscircle.com and use the subject line podcast. If you are subscribed to this podcast on iTunes, please consider giving the show a customer rating, as this can help to build our audience and gain exposure for our writers. Thanks as always to Katrina Tay for the podcast artwork.